You place a new bolt, right to jail. Leave a sling, jail. Fix a cam, jail. Replace a rusty quicklink, believe it or not, also jail. We have the best wilderness in the world because of jail. National Park Service, me. Anchors in the wilderness, that's a paddling. I want to safely wrap the route. National Park Service. Wilderness land managers, catching you. Okay, so all of this super useful information on Mountain Project must be coming from somewhere. Let's just scroll to the top here and click the first thing there is to click. Action alert, stop bolting prohibition. I'm gonna get slaughtered for this. The American Alpine Club says, take action. Is taking action bolting everything you want to bolt before the policy goes into place? And then the ASCA has bold right at top, call to action. What is going on? So as a bolting nerd, this has been sent to me multiple times now, and I took a look at it. And I don't want to just be an echo chamber of what I see on the internet, but actually read the actual policy. And so that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to talk about what is being said about it, and then we're going to talk about maybe bolting as a concept, and then actually just maybe read the 20-page document instead of me interpreting what it says for you. So if you climb on public land and you trust your life to bolts, then you should pay attention to this.
Not all public land.
Okay, so it's not on all public land. Where is it, you ask? We need your help to stop the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service from implementing a new policy that could erase America's most iconic climbing routes and put our safety at risk. Okay, before I get slaughtered by these organizations, I like these organizations and I am the clickbait king, okay? But wow, okay? Just let's go through this, make it through the whole video before anybody emails me, please. Okay, so what's the policy about? These new policies would classify fixed anchors as prohibited installations in wilderness areas. So where are they getting that? If you go to the law that was made a million years ago in 1964, the Wilderness Act says, and I quote, no structure or installation, AKA, is allowed.
On congressionally designated wilderness area.
On everywhere on Earth. I mean, I guess you can't just take 4 words out of this and be like, that's what it says. No, you got to understand it's 4 congressionally designated wilderness areas. It's not lowercase wilderness where you go camping on the weekend. It's uppercase wilderness where it's a very specific designated area, which could be inside of national park or Forest Service areas. So far, what we have is this policy is going to interpret those 4 words to mean something. Let's continue. These new classifications would apply to both new and existing anchors, hindering wilderness exploration and threatening the existence of long-standing established routes, and obstructing climbers' abilities to replace old and unsafe bolts. Put a pin in that. We'll get to that in a little bit. This is a huge blow to climbers that not only threatens Americans' climbing legacy, but puts the safety of our community at risk. Get through it, Ryan. Get through it. We have until January 30th to voice our opinions. After that, they become harder to voice. I like the guidance that they give on how to leave comments. Don't simply just oppose the proposal by telling these agencies their ideas don't work, and this is what they would like to see happen. I like that. Fixed anchors are an essential piece of climbers' safety system and are not prohibited installations under the Wilderness Act. It is unreasonable for federal agencies to create new guidance policies prohibiting wilderness climbing anchors across the country when they have allowed and managed and authorized fixed anchors for decades. Just because something's been allowed for a while, it doesn't mean we still want lead in our gas. Like, it's kind of nice when things need updating and changing. I'm not saying this is the case. Prohibiting fixed anchors will create safety issues by imposing unnecessary obstacles to the regular maintenance of fixed anchors. Just reading that first sentence, it feels like we're no longer allowed to maintain the anchors in the rock. But wait, we'll get to it. Prohibiting fixed anchors obstructs appropriate exploration of wilderness areas. Land managers need to allow climbers to explore wilderness in a way that permits in the moment decisions that are necessary when navigating complex vertical. I don't know if the policy says you can't. Prohibiting fixed anchors will threaten America's rich climbing legacy and could erase some of the world's greatest climbing achievements. Climbing management policy needs to protect existing routes from removal. But does the policy say they don't want any of those things? So since we have the National Park and the U.S. Forest Service comments only, they're saying restrict the establishment of new routes to existing climbing opportunities on non-wilderness lands is unenforceable and will create confusion amongst land managers and climbers. That is a really good point. I do not understand how any of this will be enforced if they're like, no more bolting. But are they actually saying that? So what are these proposals? These two separate and distinct climbing guidance proposals inform how these agencies would manage climbing within their respective areas. I think that represents what was said, Will. These proposals include a novel interpretation of fixed climbing anchors as prohibited, which reverses over 60 years of precedents in wilderness located in national parks and national forests, respectively. It does change that.
It does.
What might these proposals mean for climbers? By reclassifying fixed anchors, including slings, bolts, pitons, ice screws are not very permanent. Give them about 2 hours in the sun and they're not fixed. As prohibited installations in wilderness and national forests, existing and new fixed anchors would require analysis and approved by local land managers. And then the American Alpine Club is concerned this shift has the potential to impact historical climbing routes, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, people are concerned about things. The ASCA is asking climbers to comment on both documents. This is the only opportunity we get to change the language in these directives, and it is imperative that we make our voices heard. This is the time to voice your opinion. What is cool about policies and laws is they can technically be changed, but it is a lot harder once they're put in. Fair enough. These aren't as permanent as the bolts you're putting in. They say replacement of existing fixed anchors should not be restricted in any way. We are against the requirements for permits for new routes. However, if a permit for a new route must be issued in certain rare and sensitive areas, it cannot require an exact fixed hardware count or even hardware types because this information is impossible to know in advance. As somebody who's put in bolts, I know what I'm gonna put in when I go there. Now, I might wanna add an extra one or whatever, but you can maybe apply for the permit to be being like, oh, if I want 13, say I want 15. I don't know. And when I go bolt something, I'm not taking like titanium and long bolts and short bolts and 304 and 316 and just being like, hey, Bobby, what do you want to put in today? And it's like, I kind of have a plan before you go. Like, you can just put that as part of your permit. Anyways, I'm trying not to, yeah. If you want to replace existing fixed anchors to be better hardware, should that be restricted? Should you have to get a permit for that? I was gonna try to avoid getting on this bandwagon. One of my biggest issues with bolting is that whoever put it in, you gotta go and ask them if you can change anything. There's a local area here that has rusted bolts all over it. And being a bolting nerd, I'm like, oh, I could go fix that. Get it? Fix hard, yeah. But I also know bolting culture is I shouldn't go do that without talking to the person who put it in, even though he technically put in zinc-plated bolts, and he did it so long ago, and he hasn't maintained it, and it's not his rock, it's public area. So it's like, we already have kind of a weird permit system required to go do anything. You can't just, or shouldn't, I guess. I mean, so that's the question. Should you be able to go, and without asking anyone about whether or not you're doing it the way everyone wants it done, should you go and go do that? So we pulled out like 30 bolts in the Lost Arrow Spire and left 6. And chain instead of tat. And the end result people liked. And if I had to get permission, like legally had to go and get a permit and all that, then that would have been 6 months to a year of a nightmare. Honestly, it wouldn't have been much more work than actually doing the bolting itself because it was a lot of work. But it is insane to me that I could technically, legally, the park was very clear. It's like, you ask permission next time. But like, technically, you could put bolts in places without like explicit permits and stuff like this policy is proposing, that it's crazy I could go change something like the Lost Arrow Spire with me and my friends. Crazy. Do you know if I used long enough bolts? Did you know the top of Lost Arrow Spire is decomposing granite? It's not hard, like Taft Point. If I didn't use good long enough bolts, or I didn't use good enough glue, or I had expired epoxy, there's just no oversight. Yeah, what if I didn't clean the hole? You can see in the video, like, we kind of show the whole process, so you kind of know, like, it's pretty good. But we also kind of got together with several highliners. Obviously, there was a bunch of us up there, and we all like, this is best practice today. I didn't just act on my own accordance. I tried to consider holistically what was going on. When Bobby goes to the Tahoe area, and is pulling bolts out, like we have in these bolt removal videos that you see, they're pretty crappy bolts. And he's putting in good bolts and he's doing a good job. But what if you didn't upsize the hole or make it longer and you spun out the bolt and you, like, a little oversight on doing something other people are gonna trust their life to? If you're gonna get bolts from the ASCA or Access Fund, like, they wanna know you're doing a good job, that you know what you're doing, and what areas are you doing? Is that in accordance with their goals? Like, that process is not hard, but it's like, I mean, with the government, it would be harder, granted, okay? But like, it's nice to have support from the community. Now, the Forest Service land managers kind of want to be in on what's going on the area they're managing. I can't even put a storage shed at my own house if I owned it with a foundation without a permit on my property. But if you go to a public area, you can't just build a road because you want to. I don't think you can can you build a trail if you want to?
I don't think.
You can't camp. You cannot sleep on the dirt without a permit. But you can go and put a bolt in that other people are gonna trust their life to without asking anybody? I mean, it's not that absurd. The government's like, I don't know about this. Should we have a policy about it? I'm trying not to get sidetracked here, but I just want to make sure you understand the current bolting culture. What's crazy to me is that you can go to an area, you see a rock that you want that, I don't know how, somebody hasn't developed yet. And you're like, you go buy a bag of 100 bolts of whatever you feel like buying, and you go, wah, I did that. And don't you dare change any of that without asking me. What a weird, like, it's not your rock. Like, what a weird system, right? That's the current situation. I don't know, how do you say it different? Like, it's just so cowboy, but not cowboy enough that I can go fix those rusty bolts without going through some weird cultural ritual of finding whoever put them in. This isn't owned by a climbing coalition. It's public. You can see the freeway from there. The ASCA does not oppose guidance on fixed anchor placement in wilderness areas. That's good to articulate here. And they're concerned, but these NPS and FS directives are unreasonable. They are unenforceable, which will create more problems than they solve and will deeply impact safety for climbers and accelerate impacts on wilderness resources, not reduce them. So one of the issues is they're not allowing any more money to manage us climbers, but now you have to manage all of us. Like, it does seem unreasonable in that way, and it does seem unenforceable because, and you don't post it on social media. Like, how are you going to enforce that? And so then you still have the bolting wars of people putting stuff in and people taking stuff out and people still being like that, and it's not as enforceable. I don't know. Oh, I like this. We encourage all climbers to read the documents in their entirety to understand what is being proposed, but we acknowledge that there is a lot of text to sift through and is time consuming. So I like the fact they encourage you to read the original document, the policy that is being proposed. We are going to do that in this video. The non-wilderness climbing management policy should maintain opportunities for new anchor replacement unless analyst determines climbing should be restricted to protect cultural and natural resources. If there is a tribal reason not to climb Devil's Tower, you aren't gonna do it. If there is a bird who doesn't like to make babies while you're watching them, and it's closed for peregrine falcon season, it's closed. That seems reasonable. The current language will place a de facto ban on placing or replacing fixed anchors until extensive analysis has been performed, but provides no additional resources for the districts to do so. So the result is a blanket ban on anchor placement and management. I think that is a jump of conclusions there. The result is that. And that part is in bold. I feel like that is a if this, then that. And I think the then that is maybe not, I could be wrong. Yeah, so they're just gonna be like, no, we don't have the money.
Yeah, but like that's a huge leap.
I never thought I would do this on camera. I'm gonna stick up for the government for just 1 second here, and then I'll stop, don't worry. We are a very small group of highliners, okay, that highline at the Fruit Bowl in Moab. And the BLM land managers, we raised money, or the Slackline US raised money for the pit toilet that's there now. And we showed, like, we worked together. There was an organization, Slackline US, that was putting together, and we, for years, saved money. And it was never going to happen. We just don't have enough money. And then the BLM's like, wow, you guys are like really working together, trying hard. You're like working with us. They paid for the rest of the toilet. I was like, my heart warmed up to the BLM. There is plenty of things to not be warmed up about the BLM, but they are trying to protect the area. Like, that is their big picture goal. Every sign, bathroom, maintained trail, road is all being done by the Forest Service or the National Park. Like, They're not trying to make it worse. They're trying to keep it from getting worse. And there might be growing pains. If this policy allows them to do that, which I may or may not think it is, which is irrelevant, I'm just going to read the document to you. So the ASCA has some pretty valid key points. So let's go over them. Aging hardware is less safe, which causes more accidents. Maintaining that shouldn't have so much red tape. I'm paraphrasing here. Bolts and fixed rappel stations prevent resource degradation in delicate alpine environments. This is like an entire video I'm making right now with a TAT related thing. When you have a bunch of TAT around a tree or boulders in a canyon or whatever, 2 well-placed bolts could leave less impact. Southwest canyons have a bunch of grooves in the sandstone. If you just have 2 good bolts right here, and you wouldn't have the grooves. So they are basically saying bolt anchors tend to reduce trampling, social trail creation, delicate alpine environments, directing all climbers to a single location on something bomber. Cool. When climbers rappel, they rely completely on an anchor, and that, if it fails, could kill them. Prohibiting the maintenance of anchors, or the placement of them, would increase the use of unreliable natural features that greatly increase the risk of the anchor failing and impacts on vegetation. On wilderness routes, bolts are already placed sparingly. In situations where no removable gear can be placed, bolts are placed to prevent catastrophic falls. Rappelling from some type of fixed anchors is often the only option for climbers to safely retreat from routes without SAR rescue. And for example, during inclement weather. I don't think people are putting bolts in because it started raining. What does that even mean? You know what's happening here? Black Diamond paid off the government, so you'll buy more cams and go trad climbing. I just didn't know that you could just go bolt stuff without any social, legal, or whatever consequences right now. In like a protected wilderness area national park. I wouldn't even bolt a new highline in Yosemite without it being like, woo! Shall we read what the actual policy says? Here we have the wilderness stewardship. Fixed anchors, fixed equipment, national parks. Specifically wilderness and national parks. Section 1. The NPS has long recognized that climbing is an important and historical relevant recreational activity in many NPS wilderness areas. Nice. Climbing, including climbing in wilderness areas, continues to grow in popularity. That's true. Historically and currently, specialized anchoring equipment and ropes are used while climbing to reduce the risk of consequential fall. Anchors may be temporary and removable, or they may be permanently affixed to the climbing surface, fixed anchor. The most common kind of fixed anchor is a fixed bolt, which is a type of permanent anchor that is fixed in a hole drilled in the rock. Very specific. Other types of fixed anchors or fixed equipment that may be left behind after the installer leaves in the wilderness include, but are not limited to, pitons, slings, fixed ropes, and ice screws. They are banning being a little bitch so you can't bail. Who leaves ice screws behind? Director's Order 41 7.2 affirms that climbing is a legitimate and appropriate use of wilderness. Can we stop and celebrate that statement? That's pretty cool. And that the occasional placement of a fixed anchor for belay, rappel, or protection purpose does not necessarily impair the future enjoyment of wilderness or violate the Wilderness Act. Wow. But that the establishment of bolt-intensive face climbs is considered incompatible with wilderness preservations. I mean, are they wrong? Director's Orders 41 7.2 also states that fixed anchors or fixed equipment should be rare in wilderness and that clean climbing techniques should be the norm in wilderness. There's no interpretation needed. This is pretty clean language. This reference Manual 41 directive clarifies that fixed anchors and fixed equipment, hereinafter referred as fixed anchors, are a type of installation under the Forest Wilderness Act, consistent with the definition of that term. And Jesus, okay, I just said this was easy to understand. Anything made by humans that is not intended for human occupation and is left unattended or left behind when the installer leaves the wilderness. That's understandable. Fixed anchors fall into this definition because they are installed and remain in place long after the installer has left. Although fixed anchors may be small, there is no de minimis except to the Wilderness Act's restriction on installation, and the combined impact of many fixed anchors in a single rock or wall can have a significant effect on wilderness character. Therefore, fixed anchors constitute a prohibited use pursuant to the Wilderness Act 4C and may only be authorized if they are determined to be necessary to meet minimum requirements for the administration of the area for the purpose of the Wilderness Act through a minimum requirement analysis, MRA. So remember our MRA. MRA has come up a lot. This does not mean that fixed anchors may not be authorized in NPS wilderness. Banned forever! I just can't. As discussed further below, climbing activities can fulfill important park and wilderness recreational purposes and can help preserve wilderness character by providing opportunities for primitive and unconfined recreation. Is climbing primitive? Ooh, rock! Park units where climbing is authorized in wilderness areas must therefore consider what level of fixed anchor use best preserves the totality of wilderness values through an MRA process. This directive gives guidance for evaluating potential actions taken by park units to authorize the placement and/or replacement of fixed anchors for recreational climbing in NPS wilderness areas. NPS wilderness areas. Installation of fixed anchors by NPS personnel for administrative and/or operational purposes, search and rescue, research, trail projects, is also subject to NPS policies and protocols regarding the MRA process. Section 2, the climbing management. This isn't that bad. It's only 20 pages. The park superintendent is responsible for the management of climbing activities within a park unit, including evaluating requests from the public to install fixed anchors in wilderness and ensuring that policies and regulations regarding fixed anchors are properly applied and enforced. In accordance with Director's Orders 41.1.2, if climbing activities occur in wilderness, climbing management strategies should be included as part of the park's wilderness stewardship plan or appropriate park planning document. These plans provide an opportunity for the park to holistically assess levels and types of climbing use and related issues and impacts and identify desired conditions, indicators, standards, and thresholds needed to minimize adverse impacts, as well as providing an opportunity for the public to review and provide comment. Park planning documents may make programmatic decisions about fixed anchor authorizations or restrictions at park-wide level or within designated park management zones or units, including the identification of special conditions, limitations, or thresholds. Depending on the circumstances, programmatic decisions in a park plan may be supported by a programmatic MRA, or the MRA process may be deferred to individual applications under the framework laid out in plan. That sounds like red tape. The planning process also provides an opportunity for tribal consultation on climbing in wilderness areas. For Native Americans, wilderness can be a homeland or a place of profound tribal history and traditional use. Many NPS wilderness climbing areas and opportunities are located at or near culturally sensitive areas and resources, sacred sites, burial sites, cultural resources, archaeological artifacts. Thus, consulting with federally recognized Indian tribes is of critical importance when managing climbing activities in NPS wilderness. Isn't that already a thing? In the absence of a formal park plan that addresses wilderness climbing, park superintendents may manage wilderness climbing activities and evaluate individual requests to install or replace fixed anchors through an interim guidance or strategy, or may rely on existing guidance in the park's wilderness stewardship plan and other relevant park planning documents and NPS policies. In this situation, individual approvals must be subject to MRA process. Park superintendents may also choose to restrict or prohibit new and/or replacement fixed anchors, subject to emergency replacements described in the paragraph below, until a formal planning process is completed. Existing fixed anchors may continue to be used. Parks should evaluate all routes with existing fixed anchors when practicable, as funding and resources allow, through either a park area or route-specific MRA. On routes that have not yet been evaluated, climbers may make emergency replacements of pre-existing fixed anchors if necessary to exit the climb in the safest and most expeditious manner possible. That's not how you say that. All other replacements must be evaluated through an MRA before being approved, though a park-specific planning process may provide more direction regarding replacement of fixed anchors. So it sounds like if you're stuck on a rock, they're not going to make you stay up there for 6 months while you go through red tape. Once a route has been evaluated and approved for continued use in wilderness, replacement of existing bolts on the route may be done without a new MRA unless wilderness character conditions have changed since the initial review, or if the replacement will include the drilling of a new hole or the use of a power drill. Permit considerations are discussed further in Section 5. Section 3, Fixed Anchor Application Procedures. Regarding of whether approval is issued through a programmatic or site-specific MRA review, the park should require permit applications for specific installations or replacement requests to establish and ensure compliance with any special terms, conditions, or special provisions. Requests should submit in writing to the park superintendent or their designee via letter, email, or approved application form, and must include specific details related to the climbing activity, including but not limited to the climber's name and contact information, specific location or area approach and exit route, name of route, formation, the information you're gonna need. Okay, moving on. Whenever possible, a map or photograph depicting the specific areas and exit route and climbing location should be included. The more information you give them, the easier it is for them to make a decision. Oh, I'm interpreting. I said I wouldn't do that. Note that any application form developed by the park to collect information from the public must be reviewed and approved by the Office of Management and Budget in accordance with the Paperwork Reduction Act. OMB approval, and does any of this matter? Nah, this is paperwork stuff. Park units where climbing occurs in wilderness areas should ensure that fixed anchor requests and application procedures are clearly posted on the park website and readily available at appropriate park locations. So it doesn't sound like it'd be that hard to figure out how to apply for the permit. Park-specific procedures should include timelines for application submission and park review, determination, and response to the applicant. Having to get a permit to climb El Capitan sounded like the end of the world. I also understand why they want to do that. I didn't find it to be that bad when I had to go do it. Now, if you're a weekend warrior and showing up Friday night and trying to blast, yes, it's pretty annoying. But we're talking about bolts here, not a quick weekend up El Cap. I couldn't even imagine bolting something in Enchantments, how hard it was to even get the permit to camp there.
Yeah.
Just to, I sure would have loved to have one extra bolt on that route I did though. Section 4, Fixed Anchor Evaluation Procedures. The MRA is required for individual case-by-case applications to install fixed anchors. I feel like we've gone through this. An MRA is a documented two-step process for redundancy that first determines whether an action is necessary for administration of the area as wilderness, and if so, identifies the method or tool to accomplish the action with the least adverse impact on wilderness character. I wonder if they would let you core drill using a power drill if you could replace a glue-in bolt with the same hole rather than putting in a new hole because you couldn't do that by hand. Step 1 of the MRA process determines whether accommodating recreational climbing opportunities is a necessary activity to administer the wilderness area. Director's Order 41 affirms that climbing is a legitimate and appropriate use of wilderness. Step 1 should discuss how climbing fulfills park and wilderness recreational purposes and furthers wilderness values. For example, parks should consider whether climbing is identified as an important recreational activity in the unit's enabling legislation, wilderness destination, foundation document, or management plans. Parks should also consider the history of climbing at the park and how it contributes to the park's unique recreation opportunities. Okay. If appropriate, parks should consider what climbing opportunities exist outside of wilderness and whether those are sufficient to realize the recreational objectives of the park, or whether some type of climbing in wilderness is necessary to fully realize the purposes of the wilderness area. Step 1 of the MRA process should discuss how recreational climbing preserves the qualities of wilderness character. The MPS, in coordination with other wilderness management agencies, has defined the term wilderness character by identifying 5 specific qualities of wilderness character based on the definition of wilderness in the Wilderness Act. Whew. These qualities include natural, untrampled, undeveloped, outstanding opportunities for solitude or primitive and unconfined type of recreation, other features of ecological, geological, scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. It is important to note that recreational climbing is an appropriate activity in the NPS wilderness that connects people with the land, builds self-reliance, presents challenge, and requires skill. These experiential values can provide opportunities for primitive and unconfined recreation and therefore be necessary to administration of the wilderness area. So far, I don't feel like very established historical routes would be threatened. Finally, step 1 should also note how recreational climbing in wilderness satisfies the public purpose of recreation established in the Wilderness Act. If a park finds that providing for recreational climbing is necessary for administering the wilderness area for wilderness purposes, then a range of alternatives to accommodate climbing activities should be analyzed in step 2 of the MRA process. What is step 2? Step 2 considers a range of possible alternatives for different levels of fixed anchor use to accommodate recreational climbing in wilderness, including an option that considers the impacts of not authorizing any fixed anchors in wilderness or denying the specific installation application, depending on the circumstances. The analyst should be guided by the broad policy direction in the Director's Order 41 that fixed anchors or fixed equipment should be rare, and that clean climbing techniques should be the norm in wilderness. Director's Order 41 also states that occasional fixed anchor use does not necessarily impair the future enjoyment of wilderness or violate the Wilderness Act, but that the establishment of bolt-intensive face climbs is considered incompatible with wilderness preservation and management. Pisses me off how, reasonable this thing is. This is just written by some trad dad. Some bolts okay, but not too many. The analysts of alternatives should evaluate both positive and adverse impacts to the qualities of wilderness character in each of the alternatives and associated components to determine what level of fixed anchors best preserves the totality of wilderness character. The park should discuss the effects on different aspects of wilderness character caused by different levels of fixed anchor use and possible trade-offs between those effects. The Step 2 analysts may also be informed by discussing how specific climbing types, methods, traditions, history, and ethics regarding climbing have evolved in the park. In addition, the following factors are important to consider when evaluating fixed anchors and fixed equipment. Installations and power drills, motorized equipment, may constitute a negative impact to the undeveloped quality of wilderness character. Really? Recreational climbing can have a positive impact on the primitive and unconfined recreational quality of wilderness character and may also have a positive impact on the solitude quality of wilderness character. Sound associated with drilling holes in the rock for the placement of fixed anchors may have a negative impact on the solitude quality of the wilderness character. The other features of value quality include features of significant importance to the culture and traditions of affiliated tribes and indigenous people, including but not limited to sacred and spiritual sites, burial sites, archaeological artifacts, and other cultural resources. Sorry! The park should then select the level or type of fixed anchor use that best preserves the totality of wilderness character and explain the decision. Nice. They can't just say yes or no, I guess. If some level of fixed anchor use is authorized, the park should specifically explain why the alternative of no fixed anchors or deny the specific installation application was not selected. The park should then determine whether a specific route, which includes a suitable number of fixed anchors to address safety concerns, meets the alternative selected in the MRA and therefore qualifies as the minimum necessary in wilderness. A comprehensive outline for evaluating recreational climbing and fixed anchor applications in wilderness through an MRA process is provided in Appendix B. So far, again, my pitchfork doesn't have any blood on it. Section 5, Fixed Anchor Authorization Procedures. If a specific application to install a fixed anchor is approved through either a programmatic or a site-specific MRA, then the park should issue a permit to authorize the installation activity and set appropriate terms and conditions. Permit may be issued under the authority of 36 CFR blah 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 for installing a fixed anchor, which authorizes the superintendent to designate areas for a specific use or activity or impose conditions or restrictions on a use or activity and under the authority of law. For leaving a fixed anchor in the rock, which authorizes the superintendent to designate locations and circumstances where property may be left unattended for longer than 24 hours. You mean like fixed ropes on El Cap? The requirement to obtain a fixed anchor permit should be established in the superintendent's compendium. The following template language is recommended but may be altered to meet the park-specific needs. If you want to read that section, pause the video. Fixed anchor permits should include specific terms, conditions, special provisions to ensure the protection of the park resources and visitors and preservation of the wilderness character, including but not limited to the number, type, and color of fixed anchors and specific installation dates, and location of climbing routes where the authorization is applicable, and any temporal restrictions. It is also highly recommended that the permittee be required to provide a post-climb report regarding the number and location of fixed anchors that were installed. The backcountry and wilderness use fixed anchors and fixed equipment permit is provided in Appendix C. You know what this reminds me of? The parent you're pissed tells you can't go out past 9 unless you ask permission, you have a reason, you check in with them, all these things. You're mad at them when you're 16, but when you're 30, you're like, oh, my parents were good. To be fair, some organizations suck. Some superintendents might suck. Some locations and areas might be like, they're like abusing it or something.
Yeah, but also like...
most places don't care. Like they're like, just don't make a fuss. Like not Yosemite, but like less popular areas. Section 6, Liability Considerations. As a general matter, the NPS should seek to manage wilderness area with reasonable care, including identifying hazards that pose a danger to visitors. In the case of climbing, fixed anchors may, for various reasons, pose a safety risk that the NPS cannot always mitigate. In locations where fixed anchors may pose a safety risk, the NPS should attempt to communicate this risk to the public and seek ways to mitigate it, including replacing or removing potentially hazardous anchors. I can't think of an anchor that puts general public at risk, though. A loose-ass flake.
Yeah.
Above a main trail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those LAFs will get you. The following actions and measures should be considered to mitigate risk related to fixed anchors. Develop a climbing management plan that includes a practical and reasonable plan for review and management of fixed anchors. Warnings or advisories that the NPS does not install climbing bolts and users should confirm any bolt's fitness before use are highly recommended. Appropriate locations include website, any distributed printed material relating to climbing, at trailheads, communication, science park. This is for the NPS not to have liability about like, we approved this, but we permitted it. Where periodic inspection by the NPS staff is not practical, consider other methods such as implementing a climber reporting system for potentially problematic fixed anchors. This method would ideally include a plan for documenting resolution of reports. Is that in there twice? It says there's a typo in this. When appropriate, implement temporary or permanent closures of climbing routes or areas, or approve a reroute of a particular climbing route. Work with climbing groups or individual climbers to replace or remove fixed anchors. That's pretty legitimate because somebody wants to probably fix it, which is probably somebody who wants to do a permit with it. And if they like get support by the NPS, like that's pretty cool. Work with climbing groups or individual climbers to replace or remove fixed anchors. Use climbing groups or individual climbers through the Volunteer in Parks program to help monitor and manage fixed anchors. Use GIS technology to document locations and manage fixed anchors. Appendix A. They have already made the permit application. The name, the office address, telephone number, and then would be my information here. Type of backcountry and wilderness use. Rock climbing, bouldering, mountaineering, mountain climbing. Canyoneering, not bad. Gotta be pretty stoked canyoneering's included. Highlining, that's validating. And slackline, I don't know why slacklining has to be special. Maybe if it's a water line or something. But like, that's awesome that they've not just included climbing, which is already a big enough deal, but that they're including our smaller sports as well, including the other. Itinerary details, the entry location date, the exit, the access trail, the egress trail, the climbing route, formation and face, the mountain or summit, the GPS locations. Like, man, you submit a good like plan up front. Doesn't sound like if they would permit it, that they would turn it down. Hardware and equipment subject to permit. Bolts, quantity, pitons, quantity. Fixed rope length, slings, ice screws. Those ice screws, man. So Denali, they'll fix lines on snow pickets.
Yeah.
Interesting. Ladders, power drill, hand drill. This is an NPS wilderness area thing. It's interesting they have power drill as even on here. Other information, vehicle, personnel locators. Wow, this is okay. And then they have to give it back to you in a timely manner, which for the government could be a long time. Privacy Act statements, doesn't seem whatever. Minimum requirements. Is this the problem with Privacy Act statements? I'm just scrolling right past it. So if you want to read pages 12 through 18, be my guest. But if you go down to 19, Appendix C, it is the permit that you would receive to do this. And it looks like a permit. And you are given permission, and they have a signature spot and terms and conditions. Of course, also the link in the description for the Forest Service Manual will be there. I'm only going to read in here what might be more different and relevant to read than what we've already read, because most of it's similar. So page 2 has a table of contents. So 2355-03. Climbing is an appropriate use of NFS lands when conducted in accordance with applicable law and Forest Service directives and consistent with the applicable land management plan and climbing management plan. Emphasize appropriate and responsible use of NFS resources and resource protection in planning, developing, and managing climbing opportunities on NFS land. Develop a climbing management plan covering each administrative unit or ranger district that has one or more climbing opportunities as required and as funding resources allow, which is what concerns most people. A climbing management plan can cover a single climbing opportunity or multiple climbing opportunities across a variety of landscapes. Prioritize the development of climbing management plans on climbing opportunities in wilderness and on climbing opportunities outside of wilderness with the highest level of need, such as high levels of use, use conflicts, resource degradation. Ensure that the climbing management plans are consistent with applicable law and directives and the applicable land management plan, including but not limited to Wilderness Act, the specific laws designating wilderness areas, and HPA, endangered species, NFS trails, tribal relations, the general stuff. 4. Climbing has long been an important and historically relevant form of primitive or unconfined recreation consistent with the wilderness character of many NFS wilderness areas. Climbing or climbing-related activity in wilderness must be restricted or prohibited when its occurrence, continuation, or expansion would adversely impact wilderness character. 5. The placement, replacement, and retention of fixed anchors and fixed equipment are permissible in wilderness when it is determined that they are the minimum necessary to facilitate primitive or unconfined recreation or otherwise preserve wilderness character. Existing fixed anchors and fixed equipment may be retained pending completion of a MRA as funding and resources allow to determine whether they are minimum necessary for administration of the area for Wilderness Act purposes. Does that mean they can take them out? So they'll do the MRA,
Yep.
and then they give you permission to do it or not. They're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Plan and manage climbing and the placement, replacement, and retention of fixed anchors and fixed equipment in wilderness consistent with principles of wilderness stewardship. A. Climbing that does not rely on use and placement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment that is consistent with leave no trace principles and does not concentrate human activity constitutes primitive and unconfined, and may occur in wilderness unless prohibited by a closure order. This type of climbing includes the use of temporary anchors and equipment that can be removed, such as everything Black Diamond sells. Big trads coming after your bolts. The placement of a fixed anchor or fixed equipment does not necessarily impair the future enjoyment of wilderness or violate the Wilderness Act, but the establishment of bolt-intensive climbing opportunities may be incompatible with the preservation of the wilderness character. Yeah, it might be. All right, so number 7 is important. Forest Service personnel are responsible for the placement, are not responsible for the placement or replacement, or assessing or ensuring the safety of fixed anchors and fixed equipment on NFS land. Climbers are responsible for placement and replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment when those activities are authorized by the land management plan or climbing management plan. Climbers have personal and exclusive responsibility for assessing the safety of installed fixed anchors and fixed equipment. When the Forest Service or other federal, state, or local government personnel determines that placement or replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment is necessary to facilitate emergency operations, the Forest Service will allow the placement or replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment for emergency operations by climbers, Forest Service, or other federal, state, or local government personnel. It's like search and rescue. That's what I imagine that means. That just means we're responsible.
That means that they're not going to chop your bolts. That's what that means.
No, but they could commission Sean. Sean might have to get a permit now. 11. A via ferrata is not covered by FSM 2355. Rather, a via ferrata is a natural resource-based recreational facility that should be authorized under a commercial recreation special use authorization, such as ski area permit. So 2355.21, the climbing management plan, you need one of these apparently now. As funding and resources allow, that is a scary statement, prepare a climbing management plan for climbing opportunities in congressionally designated wilderness, not for everywhere, and for climbing opportunities outside wilderness where district ranger determines that climbing is causing adverse resource impacts or use conflicts. So a little bit outside of wilderness. And post the climbing management plan on the website of the applicable administrative unit. 2355.21, number 5. Address access to climbing opportunities. Approach routes and any associated parking should be displayed on a map. So it's not just the route itself, but holistically the impact it will impact. So their job on number 8 is include guidance on fixed anchors and fixed equipment. Put in a good bolt, guys. So 2355.31 is outside of wilderness. So this is putting fixed anchors and fixed equipment outside of the wilderness. 1, placement and replacement of fixed anchors are appropriate outside of wilderness where their placement and replacement are route restricted, minus the fine print. The placement and replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment must be consistent with any applicable climbing management plan. Number 3, restrict the placement and replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment to establish climbing opportunities and to approve new climbing opportunities that have been evaluated for natural and cultural resource impacts. It's not just a blanket thing that restricts it, it's things that are not compatible with other stuff. Allow placement and replacement of fixed anchors only for the purpose of belay, rappel, traverse, resource protection, or aiding in ascent and descent. Big walls, baby! Oh yeah. Sport climbing! So it says allow and restrict.
Restrict does not mean less. It just means...
it does not mean remove. If it means...
Yes, it just says, hey, keep it to places where there already are bolts. And if you're going to put a new area, let's make sure it's not a sacred site.
This is the juicy one. 2355.32. Placement, replacement, and retention of fixed anchors and fixed equipment in congressionally designated wilderness. Woo, it's a mouthful. Climbing can fulfill important wilderness recreational purposes and can help preserve wilderness character by providing opportunities to be primitive. God damn, they keep using this stuff. This is the line.
That's the line.
Whoa. Fixed anchors and fixed equipment are installations for purposes of Section C of the Wilderness Act 16 U.S.C. 1133 C. Therefore, a forest supervisor may authorize the placement or replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment in wilderness based on a case-specific determination that the placement or replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment is the minimum necessary for administration of the area for Wilderness Act purposes, including primitive and unconfined recreation and preservation or wilderness. Jesus. They got paid per word to make this. Examples include allowing climbers to use fixed anchors and fixed equipment in wilderness at climbing opportunities that provide outstanding opportunities for primitive and unconfined recreation, directing climbers toward designated climbing opportunities with fixed anchors and fixed equipment to protect sensitive resources such as cultural resources or nesting bird habitat, and approving fixed anchors and fixed equipment in areas where impacts on the rock face are occurring due to the use of rock hammers to chip handholds or footholds onto the rock. Examples include allowing climbers to ... and approving fixed anchors and fixed equipment in areas where impacts on the rock face are occurring. Rope grooves. I'm not trying to offer interpretation here, but sure sounds if you got a lot of rope grooves in your sandstone, you might get approved for a bolt. Determine whether placement or replacement of fixed anchors and fixed equipment in wilderness is the minimum necessary. Yep. Okay, so that's it. I have been reading this whole time for that? They are installations, but ask. Number 4, placement of new fixed anchors and fixed equipment in wilderness is allowed without prior authorization supported by the MRA to respond to an emergency. Well, yeah, it's an emergency. In the interim, emergency replacements of individual fixed anchors posing as legitimate safety concern may occur unless prescribed otherwise through an approved climbing management plan or evaluation planning document. It sounds like if it's dangerous and you can climb the thing, you can replace it if you ask. I would have asked if I could have done the Los Cerros Spiral Bolt and proposed the whole plan, done pictures. I would have nerded out to the point of driving them nuts if this permit thing was on their website. And then I would have just waited. I waited probably a year and a half to even do it, from that conception of making permission accessible. What are they supposed to say? Throw money at it, even if we're not giving more to you, as budget allows. What else are they supposed to say? It's a scary thing when their government's like, yeah, maybe if you have money, it's a low priority. But 7, prohibit use of motorized rock drills and practices such as chipping and use of glue, epoxy, and other fixations for handholds. Yes, you cannot glue handholds on. Wow. Is that already not allowed? So let's rewind and look at these articles again. Feel like stop the bolt prohibition isn't accurate enough. I understand you want people to read it. Just stop and look. Title of this video is probably going to be clickbait. We need your help to stop the National Park Service and U.S. Forest Service from implementing a new policy that could erase America's most iconic climbing routes and put our safety at risk. When I read this article from Access Fund, it's not bad, but these titles, I think, is what made this video. This shift has the potential to impact historic, climbing routes in iconic areas, as well as stifle future route development and fixed anchor maintenance for safety. I think if I were to go replace bolts, it would make my life a lot easier to not have to go jump through a bunch of hoops in order to go do it. I also understand why the government might want to have that policy. The SAA does not oppose guidance on fixed anchor placement in wilderness areas. Yeah, that's great. They are unenforceable. Yeah, most of this is not even practical. The current language will place a de facto ban on placing or replacing bolts, true-ish, until extensive analysis has been performed, but provides no additional resources for the districts to do so. So they don't get more money to manage this thing, and they're already pretty much exhausted of resources. So the jump of the conclusion here they're making is, the result is a blanket ban on anchor placement and maintenance. And so Forest Service is supposed to, every area is supposed to make their own climbing management plan. Is that going to happen? Maybe that is where the blanket ban comes in. But this is where, if you're climbing and you don't install bolts, your help with people who are managing these areas and advocating and making the climbing coalitions, lots of voices do move mountains or get bolts put in them.